Have you ever replayed something you said years ago and suddenly felt your stomach drop because you realized how sharp it was? Have you ever wondered how some people can smile in public, but leave quiet damage behind them wherever they go? Welcome back to the channel. Today we are talking about a truth that sounds simple until life proves it to you the hard way. Be careful how you treat people. Not because you are trying to look nice. Not because you are trying to build a good reputation. But because every word you release into the world carries weight. And that weight eventually lands somewhere. Sometimes it lands on someone else. And sometimes it lands back on you. And if you think you can control where it lands, life will eventually teach you humility. Here are the two main ideas I want to hold in your mind while you listen. First, the way you treat people is not a small detail of your personality. It is the signature of your character. When you are kind only when life is easy. Your kindness is not kindness. It is comfort. Real character shows up when you are tired, when you are stressed, when you feel powerful, and when you feel threatened. Second, what you put into people becomes part of what they carry. A sentence can become a wound or a blessing. A moment of disrespect can become a lifelong echo. And if you really understand cause and effect, you will realize that your treatment of others is also your training in wisdom. Let me tell you a story that begins in an ordinary place. Because most life-changing lessons do not begin with dramatic music. They begin with a small moment that you do not think will matter. His name was Curtis. Curtis was talented, ambitious, and sharp. In school, he was the kid who could talk fast, think fast, and win arguments without breaking a sweat. People admired his confidence. Teachers sometimes even laughed at how quick his comebacks were. Curtis learned early that words could become weapons. And if you were the one holding the weapon, you would never feel small. Curtis carried that skill into adulthood. He went into sales, then management. He climbed quickly. He loved the feeling of being the one who decided what was acceptable. He loved the feeling of being the one who could approve or reject. He loved the way people adjusted their tone when he entered a room. He told himself he earned it. He worked hard. He was smart. He deserved respect. At home, Curtis was not physically violent. He was not the type to break things. He did not punch walls. But he had something else, a cutting tongue. He could turn a minor mistake into a humiliating lesson. He could turn a normal conversation into a courtroom. He could make you feel guilty for needing anything at all. His wife, Tasha, used to be bright and expressive. When they first met, she laughed easily and spoke with warmth. She was the kind of person who believed people were mostly good. She believed problems could be solved with patience. She believed love meant you protect each other in public and in private. But after years with Curtis, something changed. Tasha became quieter. She started checking her words before she spoke, as if her mouth had become a risky place. She stopped bringing up small dreams because Curtis would label them unrealistic. She stopped sharing her feelings because Curtis would call her emotional. She stopped asking for comfort because Curtis would say she was being dramatic. Curtis did not notice the change the way you would notice a storm. He noticed it the way you notice the air conditioning turning on. A subtle shift in atmosphere. He liked the quiet. He called it peace. One evening, Tasha made a small mistake. She forgot to pay a bill on time. The late fee was not huge, but Curtis reacted as if the house was burning down. He stood in the kitchen, holding the letter in his hand, and said, "Do you know how irresponsible this is? Do you know how many times I have to carry everything because you cannot handle basic tasks?" Tasha tried to explain. She said, "I have been overwhelmed this week. I am sorry. I will fix it." Curtis laughed, not a joyful laugh, a laugh that meant you are beneath me. Overwhelmed. You call this overwhelmed. You do not know what real pressure is. You live in comfort and still complain. Tasha looked down. Curtis continued. He said, "I swear, if I did not manage this household, we would be living in chaos. Sometimes I wonder what I married." That sentence landed like a stone. Because it was not about the bill. It was about her worth. Tasha whispered. That hurts. Curtis replied. You are too sensitive. People cannot even tell you the truth. This is why you will never grow. Tasha went quiet. Curtis felt like he won. This is the hidden sickness of disrespect. When you are in the habit of winning, you forget you are losing something more valuable than an argument. You are losing the bond. That night, Tasha did not fight back. She did not slam doors. She simply went to bed early. Curtis watched television, satisfied, thinking he restored order. But inside Tasha, something shifted. Not rage, clarity. A few weeks later, Curtis had a meeting at work with a new employee, a young man named Luis. Luis was new to the company, still learning the systems. He made a small error in a report. Curtis called him into the office. Luis walked in nervous, holding a notebook. Curtis did not sit down. He stood, leaning against the desk, looking down at Luis like a judge. Curtis said, "This is unacceptable. Do you know how foolish this makes the team look?" Luis apologized quickly. Curtis cut him off. Curtis said, "Do not apologize. Learn. If you cannot handle simple tasks, maybe you do not belong here." Luis nodded, trying to stay calm. Curtis kept pushing. Curtis said, "I do not have time to babysit. People like you slow everything down." Luis looked up for a moment, and Curtis saw something in his eyes. Not anger, not rebellion, something quieter. Shame. Luis whispered, "I am trying. I am working 2 jobs. I come here right after my shift at night. I am not trying to mess up." Curtis felt a flicker of irritation. He said, "Your personal life is not my problem. You were hired to perform." Luis nodded again. Then he said something that Curtis did not expect. Luis said, "I understand. I just hope nobody talks to your mother the way you talk to me." The room went still. Curtis felt his chest tighten. His first instinct was to attack back. But something about that sentence hit him deeper than an insult. It was not a direct insult. It was a mirror. Curtis snapped, "Watch your mouth." Luis apologized and left. Curtis tried to shake it off. But later that day, Curtis got a call. His mother had fallen. She was in the hospital. Not life-threatening, but serious enough to create fear. Curtis rushed to the hospital. In the waiting room, he saw his mother looking small in the bed, her arm wrapped, her face tired. Curtis felt a wave of tenderness he had not felt in a while. He sat by her bed and said, "What happened?" His mother said, "I slipped. I am fine. Do not worry." Curtis asked the nurse questions in a demanding tone. The nurse responded professionally, but Curtis could sense a boundary. Curtis did not like boundaries when he was scared. He raised his voice. The nurse said, "Sir, I understand you are worried, but please lower your voice." Curtis felt anger rise. He said, "I am her son. I have a right to know what is happening." The nurse stayed calm. She said, "And I have a responsibility to keep this environment safe and respectful." Respectful. The word landed again. Curtis felt his mother squeeze his hand gently. She said, "Curtis, do not talk to her that way. She is helping me." Curtis froze. He did not expect correction from his mother in that moment. His mother continued softly, "I did not raise you to speak like that to people." Curtis felt embarrassed. He looked at the nurse, then back at his mother. The nurse left the room. Curtis sat there, suddenly aware of his own tone, his own habit of using intensity to control. He tried to dismiss it. He told himself, "The nurse is sensitive. My mother is tired. I am stressed." But the mirror was forming. That night, Curtis returned home exhausted. Tasha asked him how his mother was doing. Curtis answered briefly. Tasha offered to bring food to the hospital the next day. Curtis nodded. Then Tasha said something quiet. She said, "Do you want me to come with you tomorrow?" Curtis replied, "Do whatever you want." Tasha paused. Then she said, "Curtis, I need to tell you something." Curtis felt irritation. He said, "Can this wait? I have enough stress." Tasha said, "It cannot wait anymore." Curtis looked at her. Tasha held herself still, like someone who had practiced courage in silence. She said, "I have been living in fear of your tongue. Not fear like you will hit me. Fear like you will make me feel small. And I cannot do it anymore." Curtis felt his chest tighten. His instinct was to defend. He wanted to say, "I am just honest. You are too sensitive. You are making me the villain." But something interrupted him. The image of his mother, small in the bed. The nurse saying respectful. Louise saying your mother. Curtis opened his mouth and nothing came out. Tasha continued, "I love you. But love does not mean I accept disrespect. I am not leaving tonight. But I am telling you the truth. If this continues, I will eventually leave. Not to punish you. To save myself." Curtis felt anger and fear at the same time. He said, "So now you are threatening me." Tasha said, "I am not threatening. I am being honest. I am tired of living like my feelings are an inconvenience." Curtis tried to regain control. He said, "You are exaggerating. You have a good life." Tasha nodded slowly. She said, "A good life with a small heart becomes a prison." Curtis laughed bitterly. He said, "You think you are deep now?" Tasha did not respond. She simply went to the bedroom and closed the door. Curtis stood in the living room feeling a strange emptiness. He had always believed his words were strength. Now his words felt like a wall he built around himself. The next day, at the hospital, Curtis watched his mother interact with staff. She thanked them. She smiled. She asked questions gently. The staff responded warmly. Curtis noticed how the atmosphere changed around kindness. Later, in the hallway, Curtis, Louise. It surprised him because Luis had said he worked 2 jobs. Luis was delivering food as part of a side job. He was pushing a cart, wearing a different uniform. Luis saw Curtis and froze for a moment, then nodded politely and kept walking. Curtis felt a wave of shame. He realized Luis really was exhausted, and Curtis had added more weight to him for no reason. Curtis approached Luis and said, "Luis." Luis stopped. Curtis said, "About the other day. I was harsh." Luis looked cautious. Curtis said, "I should not have spoken to you that way. You are working hard. I see that now." Luis nodded, still cautious. He said, "Thank you." Curtis wanted to explain himself. He wanted to justify. He wanted to say he was stressed. But he caught himself. Justification was the old habit. So he said, "I will do better." Luis nodded and continued down the hallway. Curtis watched him leave and felt something unusual. Not victory. Humility. That humility was uncomfortable, because it meant Curtis had to accept that he was not as righteous as he believed. He had to accept that his behavior had consequences. Not mystical consequences. Direct human consequences. The consequence was Tasha shrinking. The consequence was employees fearing him. The consequence was nurses setting boundaries. The consequence was his mother being disappointed. The consequence was his own heart becoming tight. Curtis went home later and sat alone at the kitchen table. He remembered times he mocked people and called it humor. Times he interrupted and called it leadership. Times he criticized and called it truth. He remembered the faces, the subtle flinches, the quiet withdrawals, and then he remembered something else. His own childhood. Curtis had a father who was verbally harsh. His father never hit him, but his father used words like tools. Curtis remembered trying to please his father, hoping for approval, and instead receiving criticism. Curtis remembered promising himself he would never be weak again. He would never be the one looking down at the floor while someone else spoke over him. Curtis realized his tongue was not just a personality trait. It was armor. And armor has a cost. Armor protects you from feeling vulnerable, but it also blocks intimacy. It blocks warmth. It blocks the softness that makes relationships feel safe. Curtis realized he had been living like a warrior in a home that needed a companion. That night, Curtis knocked on the bedroom door. Tasha did not answer at first. Curtis knocked again. Softly, Tasha opened the door slightly. Curtis said, "Can we talk?" Tasha hesitated, then opened the door more. Curtis sat on the edge of the bed. He did not know how to begin because he had built his identity on being the one who never apologizes. He said, "I have been thinking." Tasha said nothing. Curtis said, "I think I have been treating people like I do not realize they are carrying something too." Tasha looked at him. Curtis said, "When you told me you are tired of my tongue, I wanted to fight you. But I saw my mother today. I saw how she speaks to people. I saw how people respond to respect. And I realized something. I am not as strong as I thought. I have been using words to control because I am afraid." Tasha blinked, surprised. Curtis continued, "I do not want to be this man. I do not want my mother to be ashamed of me. I do not want you to be afraid of me. I do not want to be the kind of person who leaves damage behind." Tasha stayed quiet. Then she said, "I do not need a speech. I need a change." Curtis nodded. He said, "I understand. Now this is where many stories would end with a clean, happy ending. But real change does not happen in one night. Real change is practice under pressure." Over the next month, Curtis tried. Sometimes he succeeded. Sometimes he failed. One morning, Curtis was stressed about finances. He snapped at Tasha over something small. A misplaced item. He used a sharp tone, then saw Tasha flinch slightly. That flinch did something to him. It was like seeing the effect of a poison you did not want to produce. Curtis took a breath and said, "I am sorry. That tone was wrong. I am stressed, but you do not deserve that." Tasha nodded slowly. She said, "Thank you." Curtis realized something important. Apology was not weakness. Apology was accountability. And accountability was strength. Curtis also began speaking differently at work. He stopped humiliating people publicly. He began giving feedback privately, with clarity but without contempt. He began listening before responding. He began noticing how often he interrupted. He began noticing how his tone shifted when he felt impatient. He began practicing restraint. At first, some employees were suspicious. They thought it was a temporary mood. Some even tested him by making small mistakes. Curtis felt the old rage rise, the urge to crush them with words. But he remembered the principle he was learning. Be careful how you treat people. So he paused. Pause is the doorway to wisdom. The pause between trigger and response is where you decide your character. Curtis began developing a personal rule. If his heart was racing, he would not speak immediately. He would breathe once, then speak. One breath. That is all it took to stop a sentence from becoming a weapon. One day, Curtis met with an employee named Ava. Not the same Ava from earlier stories. A different Ava. Ava was struggling with performance. In the past, Curtis would have shamed her. This time, he asked a question. He said, "What is happening outside of work?" Ava hesitated, then said her sister was sick and she was juggling responsibilities. Curtis felt a wave of compassion. He realized how little he knew about people's burden. He realized that his harshness often landed on wounds he could not see. Curtis said, "Thank you for telling me. Let us create a plan that supports you and keeps the work steady." Ava looked shocked, then grateful. Curtis left that meeting feeling something he had not felt in years. This is a deep truth. Cruelty creates tension in you, even if you do not admit it. The body knows. When you use words to harm, your nervous system stays in a state of aggression. That state becomes your personality. Kindness relaxes you. Respect cleans the inner atmosphere. Now, you might be listening and thinking, this sounds like morality. But it is also physics of the mind. What you practice becomes you. If you practice contempt, contempt becomes your lens. If you practice respect, respect becomes your habit. If you practice patience, patience becomes your stability. If you practice humiliation, humiliation becomes your language. Language becomes behavior. Behavior becomes destiny. This is cause and effect, not superstition. Curtis also began thinking about the people he hurt in the past. Some relationships were damaged beyond repair. Some people had moved on. Curtis could not reverse time, but he could choose his next steps. He reached out to his younger brother, Marcus, who Curtis had often mocked growing up. Curtis invited him to coffee. Marcus arrived cautious. Curtis said, "I owe you an apology. I treated you like my jokes mattered more than your feelings." Marcus stared, stunned. He said, "Why now?" Curtis said, "Because I finally realized that my humor was sometimes just cruelty wearing a smile." Marcus looked away, then said, "I have waited years to hear you say that." Curtis felt a lump in his throat. "I am sorry." Marcus nodded slowly. He said, "I accept, but I need time." Curtis said, "Take time. I am not asking you to forget. I am asking for a chance to be different." This is another key. When you treat people badly, do not demand quick forgiveness. Respect their healing. Respect their boundary. Respect that your words may have lived inside them longer than you remember. Curtis went home that day and told Tasha about the conversation. Tasha listened and said, "I can see you trying. That matters." Curtis asked, "Do you trust me again?" Tasha said, "Trust is not a feeling. Trust is a pattern. Keep building the pattern." That line is wisdom. Trust is not a promise. Trust is consistency. Now, let us bring this into a deeper spiritual frame without making it complicated. Every tradition that teaches wisdom, whether religious or philosophical, points to the power of the tongue. Words are not neutral. Words shape minds. Words shape relationships. Words shape communities. If you bless people with your words, you create warmth around you. If you wound people with your words, you create fear around you. And fear always returns, if not through punishment from outside, then through the loneliness it creates inside you. Because when people fear you, they do not tell you the truth. They hide. They pretend. They avoid. You lose real connection. Curtis used to think power meant people obey. Now he began seeing that real power is being able to walk into a room and people feel safe. Real power is being respected without needing to intimidate. Real power is self-control. Self-control is the highest control. Now, I want to take you deeper into why reading people carefully is not just a moral lesson but a survival lesson. You never know what someone is carrying. The cashier might be grieving. The coworker might be drowning in anxiety. The friend who stopped answering might be ashamed. The person who cut you off in traffic might be rushing to a hospital. The teenager who rolled their eyes might be terrified inside. The parent who snapped might be exhausted. This does not excuse bad behavior, but it invites humility. It invites you to remember that your words might land on someone at their weakest point, and your words can become the difference between them collapsing or them staying steady. Curtis learned this in a painful way one afternoon. A man in his office, named Harold, was older, quiet, reliable. Harold made a mistake on a deadline. Curtis felt stress and irritation. He started to speak harshly, then caught himself and tried to keep it clean. But his tone still carried disappointment. Harold looked down and whispered, "I am sorry." Curtis said, "We need better attention. This cannot happen again." Harold nodded and left. The next day, Curtis heard Harold had taken leave because his wife had passed away. Curtis felt shock. He did not know. Harold had not told anyone. Harold had been showing up to work while losing someone. Curtis felt sick. He remembered his tone. He remembered Harold's face. He realized his words might have been one more weight on a man already carrying too much. Curtis visited Harold and apologized. Harold listened quietly and said, "I am not angry. I just wish people understood that sometimes the mistake is not laziness. Sometimes it is grief. Curtis left that conversation feeling humbled again. Humility is not humiliation. Humility is clarity about your place in the human story. Now, there is another layer to this lesson that many people miss. Be careful how you treat people, not only because of what it does to them, but because of what it does to you. Every time you speak with contempt, you train your own heart to be hard. Every time you shame someone, you train your own mind to justify cruelty. Every time you dismiss someone, you train yourself to be disconnected. And one day, when you need compassion, you will look around and wonder why the room feels empty. Curtis was lucky. He had people who loved him enough to tell him the truth. He had a mother who corrected him. He had a wife who drew a line. He had employees who reflected his energy back to him. He had a moment of awakening before he lost everything. Not everyone gets that moment in time. Some people wake up only after divorce. Some people wake up only after losing friends. Some people wake up only after their children stop calling. Some people wake up only when they are old and realize nobody wants to sit with them. This is why the lesson matters now, not later. Now, let us shift from Curtis' story to your life, because this is where the message becomes personal. Most people do not think they treat people badly. They think they are just honest. They think they are just blunt. They think they are just stressed. They think people should not be sensitive. But ask yourself one question. When you are stressed, who pays for it? Does your stress become your family as fear? Does your stress become your partner's silence? Does your stress become your children's anxiety? Does your stress become your coworker's dread? Stress is real, but stress is not a permission slip for cruelty. A wise person learns to carry their stress without throwing it like a weapon. So how do you practice being careful in a way that is real, not fake? You begin with awareness. Notice your tone when you feel powerful. Notice your tone when you feel threatened. Notice your tone when you feel impatient. Notice your tone when you feel embarrassed. Most cruelty is not planned. It is reflex. When you notice the reflex, you can interrupt it. Then you practice restraint. You do not say the first sentence that rises. You breathe once. You choose a cleaner sentence. Clean does not mean weak. Clean means direct without contempt. You can still hold boundaries. You can still correct behavior. You can still say no. You can still be firm. Firmness without contempt is leadership. Firmness with contempt is domination. Then you practice repair. When you mess up, and you will, you repair quickly. You do not defend your tone. You do not blame the other person for making you angry. You own it. You apologize. You state the boundary again in a clean way. This builds trust. And finally, you practice compassion with standards. Compassion is not letting people walk over you. Compassion is not pretending harm is fine. Compassion is holding someone as human while holding yourself as worthy. That balance is wisdom. Now, I want to close with a deeper reflection that ties everything together. Every day you are planting seeds with your words and actions. Some seeds grow into warmth. Some seeds grow into distance. Some seeds grow into loyalty. Some seeds grow into resentment. People remember how you made them feel, even when they forget your exact words. And sometimes, they remember your words exactly, because your words became a scar. So be careful. Not careful like fearful. Careful like conscious. Because consciousness is what separates a reaction from a choice. Curtis' story is not about perfection. It is about awakening. It is about realizing that your tongue can be a sword or a bridge. And if you keep using it as a sword, you will eventually live in a world of enemies, even if nobody openly fights you. If you use it as a bridge, you will live in a world where people feel safe around you. And that safety will return to you when you need it most. Now I want to invite you into the conversation. Have you ever been hurt by someone's words in a way that stayed with you for years? Or have you ever realized that something you said in anger might have become a wound for someone else? Share your thoughts in the comments if you feel comfortable. Your story might help someone else reflect and change before it is too late. If this video helped you, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment so more people can find this message. And if you want to support the channel in a deeper way, consider joining the membership so we can keep creating long-form conversations that build wisdom, compassion, and real inner strength. Thank you for being here with me today. Speak with care, hold your power with humility, treat people like you might meet them again on a day when you need kindness. And I will see you in the next video.